please welcome Mary Coustas. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and how the career started.
Look, I was very addicted to my parents' generation, larger-than-life characters, migrants that came out from Greece in the 50s, and they were always animated and great storytellers and full of, interesting things and funny voices and funny everything to me. And so I became a little addicted to them. So I took a lot of pleasure in mimicking them, much to my mother's horror. And that sort of ignited the theatrical passion that I have and have still got. And then I decided that I would be in every musical. I am the least musical person you've ever met. But I was lucky enough, I went to school with Kate Severano and her brother, and we were all in the musicals together. I think I mimed most of the time. And then I went to university and trained as an actress and studied journalism, psychology and anthropology there. So all of that has helped me write and create everything I've wanted to do. And my mission was always very early on to pull characters from the community that I grew up in. And so that's what I've done, to create suburban heroes out of people we know and recognise.
Have we got questions from the audiences yet, or I'll keep on asking questions at the moment? Yes.
Hello. It's a very cheeky question, but I have put a few people on stage in my time, and I'm just wondering, how heavy is that wig?
I've got to say that it's the lightest wig I've ever had, but that does not mean it's not heavy, put it that way. I finally found a genius of a wig maker in Melbourne who did all my stage show wigs, and I really urge you all to come and see the stage show. It is not what you think. It is just the most enormous gift I could give to myself and the audience, so I would urge you guys to see it. In that show, I have many wigs, probably 8, because I play other characters in the show as well. So I found somebody that is just so incredibly great at doing wigs, and he's tried to make it as light as possible. But after a long day in character, I do feel like I become Frankenstein, like I start getting, the bulging out the side of my neck from the weight, but still, it's bearable.
Your struggles to become a parent have been very well documented. I know you really opened up your heart and invited people into your space with that 60 Minutes interview in particular. Would you like to share that with our audience, as much as you're willing to?
My life was not really that interesting. I mean, it was interesting to me, but I didn't think it was going to be interesting to the public. So I never did many stories about, my personal life. It was nothing extraordinary in any of it. It was just I always felt my work was more exciting than my personal life for somebody outside of my inner circle. But I struggled for 10 years to become a mother, and I did 23 IVFs in the end, and I had a lot of losses along the way. And while I was struggling through all of that, the place that I went to was my computer, and I wrote enormous amounts of material about it. I wrote letters to God. I am part-time casual, my relationship with God. I like to think that I have him on dial-up. I try not to burden, with the everyday. I try to keep it for important occasions, but I reached out outside of what I could grapple with on my own. I wrote letters to my daughter who, Donna touched on it about the year when you were born. I think you said that there was a cemetery full of stillborn babies, and I had a stillborn on my 17th attempt. It was a very complicated pregnancy, and it was the most difficult thing I've ever had to live through. And so writing the book was a love letter to my daughter who passed, Stevie. And, it elevated itself. And I wrote the book before I found out I was pregnant with my daughter Jamie, who's now 3.5 and adorable and cheeky and stinky and yummy. I decided that the story had become a bigger story than me. There came a point where it elevated itself outside of what I knew was just a story that was somewhat, typical. So I wrote about it. My husband said to me, there's a book in this, you could help other people, it would be really good. And I was nervous about writing it because I felt like I was outing every element, because like with anything that I do, I don't do it by halves. It's either all or nothing. So I had to tell every part of the story. And so I did. The book was about to be released when I found out I was pregnant. And that was 6 more. I went back to Greece 6 more, because I did 15 IVFs in Australia and I did 8 in Greece. And that was 6 attempts later, after losing Stevie, that I kept going back. Like, you know, I just knew if I could stay in the game long enough, I could get the result. And somehow I was able to sustain myself psychologically through all my writing, that I continued to go. And so there I was doing the 60-minute story, which was all about Stevie's loss and my book and all of that, knowing very well at that point that I was 21, 22 weeks pregnant with Jamie, and I was like a bad actress that every shot that they took, because I didn't tell them I was pregnant because I was still bleeding a lot in that pregnancy, walking around with a handbag in front of my, you know, quite large belly at that point, and hiding behind bits of furniture in order not to out myself with this pregnancy because I was so nervous about it. And then on the last day, I said, oh, guys, well, we're winding up the shoot. I should tell you that I'm pregnant. So I revealed it. It felt like all of Australia watched that episode of 60 Minutes. You know, everywhere I went, everybody knew my story. And often when you tell a story, you know, especially one as complicated as mine, and luckily I was able to tell that story first with the book, because it was a very complicated pregnancy, and there were, you know, I won't go into the detail of it because it's sort of unnecessary, but people remembered every aspect of my story. There's never any confusion in, oh, was it like this? Or, you know, people nail it. And so people were moved by it. And I suppose the greatest pride I have, apart from liberating, you know, people that got called WOG, as a young person, or any person still that gets called a WOG in a negative way, that in some way our humour together with the boys have shielded them a little bit from the pain of that racism, which I know still exists, but at least we feel a bit more armed in solidarity over the reclaiming of that word, is the other taboo which I was able to knock down through my own personal experience, which was the taboo of stillborns. It's very difficult when life and death appear in that same moment after so many attempts and so much heartbreak along the way, to have to be faced with your worst nightmare. That was very confronting. And so that the stillborn thing and the donor egg thing that not many people admit to, nor should they have to, but I felt like I couldn't tell part of that story without admitting to the donor egg factor, which made all the difference in the world in terms of me getting a result. So I've become an accidental pioneer in certain things, but it's the biggest blessing I've had, because I know that my story has been able to do good, not only for the memory of my daughter, but also for, you know, other roads that other people choose to follow me in terms of what I've carved. And people read that book and follow my journey and get the family that they deserve. So I'm very proud of that.
You're a very brave and inspirational woman, and sharing your story, because I've heard you quoted before by saying Greeks don't have a word for privacy, and so for you to share that has just been amazing.
Well, having said that, my mother, when I went onto a Greek television show to tell my story with my doctor, who is a Melbourne Greek that trained at Monash University and was part of the pioneering doctors that brought IVF, you know, to Australia and made it happen for the world to see. He went to Greece and opened up a clinic, and I went to do my last 8 IVFs there with him. And I went on this Greek television show to speak Greek for half an hour, and my Greek's okay, but you know, to have to speak only Greek for half an hour. I mean, I don't get nervous performing, but I was thinking just before the camera started rolling, it was live television, what was I thinking? My mother did whisper, as did my in-laws, you might not want to mention the donor egg thing. I don't mind you talking about everything, but you know what the Greeks are like. So they are private in terms of facts that don't serve their ego.
Sure.
But in terms of exposing their emotion, they're not very private.
Question from the floor?
I'm just interested, I grew up in the 70s, 80s and went to primary school and high school in Darwin, and, it can be very brutal out there in the playground. I'm interested to know, what was your experience in primary school, high school, growing up, being different, and how did you cope with it?
Well, I wasn't different for the first 10 years. For the first 10 years, I lived in Collingwood, which is, at that point was very working class and very multicultural. So I was as different as the next person, and we're all different, and there was a lot of comfort in that. And we're on a similar sort of plight to see what was possible. With not a lot of losses, really. We were starting at the bottom, so you were encouraged to take a risk because you couldn't lose anything. But then I got thrust into the white middle class, which at the time was the greatest insult I could have ever been given, because I was really happy where I was. But luckily, my parents had bigger hopes for me outside of what was comfortable for me. And that was a greater education, and I could get that in the middle class. But I was certainly the odd man out, and there is no hiding from what you are in life. That's why I say you run with it, because if we think we can outsmart anyone by thinking that we can hide what it is that is obvious to other people, we can't. So that was very, very tough. I was bullied. I worked for a number of years to try find a way to ingratiate myself. When you're in the inner, the trends hit a lot quicker, not like now where there's internet and we all have access to the same information. So when I turned up to what was very conservative middle-class suburbs of Melbourne, girls were wearing denim skirts and long white socks, and I turned up with Staggers jeans, which were the brand at the time, with my Susie Quattro hairstyle, thinking that, I was going to see other people that dressed like me. So I stood out on every level. We were loud, we were smellier because we ate garlic. My mother was wearing black at the time because her uncle died, which was killing me. She didn't, my name was wrong, my fashion sense was wrong, everything. I had everything going against me. And it took me a number of years to even feel like I was okay, but not the most popular. But you know what, and a bit like what Donna said, I knew that the future was where it was at for me. I used to go to bed every night so excited by I don't know what, but I couldn't wait for the future, because I knew that outside of high school, which is a challenging thing for most people. I know very few people that had a great experience at high school, particularly. Primary is, we're still kids. I knew that my future was up ahead for me, and that I would find my place, and that I could do some great things. Thank God I had that in my mind. Otherwise, it's a tricky time for anyone.
The impact that the WOGs, the boys, yourself, have had in changing what had become a very negative. For a while it wasn't, and then it became very negative concept, and now it's helping shield the youngsters. There's a lot of ethnic groups that have suffered that, and we've not been able to get to that sort of stage. Was that actually the intention at the time? Was it a byproduct of just a sense of humour and an ability to make people laugh? Because I figured your mum and dad were probably pretty horrified at the time that it was all happening.
I waitressed at a restaurant, as do most actresses. I just graduated from acting school, and I just so happened to serve Nick Giannopoulos at this restaurant in Melbourne. And he said to me, "You look familiar." And I'm thinking, so cliche. The guy was right. We went to the same primary school, we went to the same Greek school, and we both just graduated from different acting schools. It was poetic, really. And then he told me about a theatre company that was holding auditions, and they didn't care. They just needed one Greek, one Italian, one Vietnamese, and one Anglo-Saxon. They didn't care which gender. So Nick and I, together with a heap of other people, went to those auditions together and auditioned all day and coupled up and did scenes together. And there was an obvious it just worked. And from that job on, Nick and I looked for opportunities to work together. There's just something that happens in the energy of, so you meet your own need, like I did with writing that book, and that it met the needs of many others. And that's what happened with Wogs Out of Work. We decided to tell stories that were true to how we lived and what we'd witnessed. There were many of us out there. So it wasn't as premeditated. It was an accidental coming together of mutual personal and public need. And it was a huge audience. And in those days, we did longer seasons. I'm coming to Darwin to do one show. There is not a chance at any word of mouth because I'm doing a big theatre one night. In those days, we did smaller theatres, so every night, 150 people, when it was the tiniest theatre, each of those people would tell 10 people. So then we went from a 150-seater to a 400 to a 950 to a 1,500. And it just kept growing. I mean, social media is that, but we're so inundated with so many things we need to react to, we can't really decipher which ones are worthy and not. So it sort of happened by accident, but sort of perfectly. What we were bringing up and challenging was our identity and the fact that there was no other forum for us to do what we thought we did really well, which is act, because no one was giving jobs to people that looked like us. So it was the healthiest exchange of mutual needs, I think. And it was rock. And my stage show is that. You do not come to my stage show to see something interesting. You come to my stage show to have a collective rock, oh my God, sort of experience. It is as rock as theatre can get. And it's not deliberately done for that reason, but that audience is so hungry, so responsive, and that audience might be ethnic, or it might be gay, or it might be anyone in between. And they have that response because it is an evocative show, a show that speaks directly to its audience in a language which everyone gets. So, that's a long way of saying that it just sort of happened, and magic happens sometimes when there's a need for it. And we don't intellectually understand it, but it's what Donna said. Sorry to reference you so much, Donna. Anyone would think that like I'm stealing your material, but it's just in the doing that you find out. You can sit there and try scientifically work it out, and it doesn't work like that. It's only in the doing that you see the response that something can have, and in the staying in it and doing more and more that builds something magnificent, I think, anyway.
We've run out of time, so...
Run out of time.
I think so. Although, just give us, very quickly, how good is it being a mum?
Well, I liken it to... There's a whole wing of my heart and my peace of mind and my panoramic experience of life now since my daughter came along. I didn't realise that this whole other thing existed. And I think it's a safety mechanism, because if you don't have that experience, or if you don't want it, which is, I think, a really healthy choice to make if it's not for you, then you can still have a pretty rich life. A life that's built on independence and spontaneity and plenty of other magic things out there. But for me, it was something, I didn't want a husband necessarily. I wasn't the girl, unlike Effie, that's looking for a husband. I didn't really think about marriage, but I always thought about being a mother. So it fulfilled me in a way that I'm glad I didn't imagine, that I hoped for, but didn't. It's one of those things you don't know until you do it. But, life's a pretty active sort of experience, and like anything, if you're looking for perfection, you might not want to be a mother. But if you're looking for gloriousness personified, the most romantic experience of your life, and no offence to my husband who's very romantic, it does not compare to the love that you experience with a child.
I've seen you dress Jamie in a jumpsuit that was South Sydney Rabbitohs, so no wonder she has tantrums. Anyway.
Hey, they won after that.
Merry Coustas, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone.